Test. Hello, and welcome back to our podcast search tutorial series here on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we set up the project and we integrated React and made sure that the React component was properly rendering and deployed to staging to make sure everything works on the live hosting environment as well. In this video, we're going to continue setting up the React by carving up the theme into React components. So a key concept of React is the UI should be divided into components that are reusable for visual building blocks of the main visual UI. So you can kind of see where the components are going to be structured here. We have this one right here for the podcast search results, and that's going to be reused throughout this column. We have these over here. Each one of these is going to be its own component. We'll call this probably episode or maybe track, and those get reused here. And then we're going to have this over here for the header. We're probably going to do away with these. We're not going to worry about these for this tutorial, but towards the bottom we're also going to have a footer. So you can kind of see where the components are going to show up in a React UI. And so then our job is then to literally create those components in the React source code and then use them to construct the UI over here. So let's go ahead and get that process started. I'm going to run the Webpack. So I'm going to open up a new tab. Make sure you're in the root of the project. And let's run Webpack. So sudo, well, we don't need sudo on this. We can do npm run dev. And again, that's running the Webpack dev script right here. And that's going to compile the React code. And let's run the dev server over here. And head over to localhost 3000. So this is what we have, and check the React entry point, which is right here. Everything looks good. So let's continue. So in the src folder, we have our React entry point, and this is where we want to lay out our components. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder called components. And inside the components, we're going to create our first React component for this project after the entry point for this over here, and that's going to be our header. So let's create a new component called header.js, and let's set up the actual React code for this. So I want to create import React. I want to create the header component, and this is going to be a functional component. Let's go ahead and do the export right away. And we want this to return, for now, just a static div text. This is the header component. Okay, and let's import this component in the index.js right here. So we have to import the header component from the components directory that we just created. And let's go ahead and import that. And let's render that over here as a header component tag like that. Let's head over to our Webpack, make sure everything looks good, which it does. And let's take a look at localhost 3000 and then the React page. And now we have our header component and the entry point. So everything looks good. Let's head back to our index.js and let's get rid of this React entry point. And so now the idea here inside this entry point is we're basically rebuilding the theme home page using all React components. So if we open up the home template, we have a lot of HTML here that we want to convert into React components. But before we do that, let's import the static assets into the React template. So we have our index mustache here, which has a head tag that's empty. Let's go ahead and copy the head tag from the home template. Let's actually copy all of this too and replace it inside the React template. Okay, let's collapse that to make it easier to see. And so if we go back here, we should see the same thing, but you'll see it looks a little bit different because now we're importing the CSS from the theme as well. So if we go back to the theme, home template on the bottom, all the way at the bottom, we want to do the same thing with these JavaScript imports. We're going to need these as well. Yeah, because this contains a lot of the audio MP3 playing libraries and functionality, as well as jQuery, as you can see. So let's go ahead and import that in the React template as well. We're going to want to do that above the React imports, like so. Let's get these indentations looking lined up. Okay, and let's take a look at that, make sure nothing breaks. Let's open the console, see if there's any errors. We have a reference error, AOS not defined in the main.js. So let's get rid of this guy right here. Let's get rid of that. So inside the main.js, that'll be public, JS, and then main, and then we have an AOS initializer. Let's just get rid of that. Let's get rid of, make sure there are no unexpected errors. So we're good to go there. Okay, great. So now we have the assets from the theme imported into our React template. That's what we want. So now what we want to do is lay out the UI from the theme homepage inside the React template as well. So if we look at the home mustache all the way up on top, we have the body tag, and then the div. The initial div tag has a class called site wrap. So we're going to want to import that as well, just to make sure all the styles are consistent. So inside the src index, the entry point, here is the main wrapping div, right? That's the div that wraps all the UI that we're about to lay out. So we're going to want to import that class as well. We're going to want to assign that class attribute. But make sure you understand, be aware that in React, or more specifically in JSX, you're not allowed to use the class keyword like this. So we have to change this to class name. Otherwise, it's going to throw all sorts of warnings and errors, which we don't want. So now we have the class name in the wrapping div. Nothing's going to look any different here because we didn't lay anything out. But now we can set up our header component using the HTML from the theme. So if we open up the home mustache, if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see an actual header tag starting right here. And that's our header component. So we can just basically copy the header tag. I'm going to remove that extra space. So it's these 26 or so lines right here, 26, 27 lines. That's the header tag. And we want to head back to the header component and remove the placeholder stuff here and insert the header HTML from the theme. That should be over there. And remember what I was saying a few moments ago about how the class keyword is reserved in JSX, so these shouldn't be here and they should be replaced by class name. So it's pretty easy to do. We just do in Command Option F, and we can do a find and replace like that. And we can just replace them all by clicking that button right there, and we convert all the class references to class name, and that's going to give us a valid JSX code. And then we can save this, and that should give us a clean build. Let's check over with Webpack, which it does. So let's remove these extra spaces too. So now our header component is rendering, which is rendering over here, should show the same thing as this template, this theme over here. So now that I reload, I'm getting the same thing, which is great. So this is now rendering the header from a React component rather than just raw HTML in the theme. So that's our first component. So here our header is being laid out inside there, just like in the home template, template from the theme. And then the next section of HTML is going to be this right here, site section, which covers from here to here. So it's a lot. It's line 61 to 230. Copying and pasting all that's going to be a bit too much. So I'm just going to copy the site section div, and this is rendering right below the header. So we want to do the same thing like that. Again, don't forget it's class name, and then head back to the home template. We also have a div container So this is a Bootstrap container class, so we're going to want to copy that and render that right here. Like so. And again, it's class name, not class. And then we have a Bootstrap row right here. So let's grab that guy. And let's get these indents lined up. And then we have a column LG3, which covers from here to here. Let's grab that. And again, we want class name. And inside here, we have a featured user div, which pretty much covers the entire contents of the column 3. Okay. And again, don't forget this is class name. And then in here, finally, we have the UI that we want to lay out. So we have our search input. That's going to be this right here. We're going to hold off on this for now, and we're going to just start laying these out right away. So hold off on that, and then the next thing we want is this unordered list right here. So we want to grab that and then place that right here. Whoops. Okay, and don't forget class name. And then inside here, we have one list item. And you can see here it says Claire Stanford, and that's going to be the first one right here. So let's go ahead and just copy that one, and that's it. So let's go ahead and copy this. And let's make sure we have all the class references converted to class name. There's only a few of these. And then be aware that the image tag right here is not closed. And that's a big no-no in JSX. So in JSX, you have to close all your elements, even if they're self-closed. So a very common tag that remains unclosed is an IMG tag, as well as input tags. These typically go unclosed, same as BR, line break tags, BR tags. So you're seeing these warnings here for that reason. So we have to close that tag like so, otherwise it's going to crash. It won't work. So make sure you catch that. And we have a clean build right here. So if I reload the React, now we have our first podcast showing up right there. And so if you look at the UI from the theme, you'll see that this shows up many times. So this should be a component. So we're going to convert that into a component right now. So let's go ahead and create a new component. Let's call it podcast row. And we want to import React. We want to create the component. And inside here, we want to return this list item. And don't forget to export the component. And now this, instead of rendering the li like that, we can import the podcast row. And we can do that instead. Make sure you close it, and here check to see if Webpack is throwing any errors, which it looks clean right now, and then go ahead and reload the React page and we have the same thing. And then if I take that podcast row component and just do it a bunch of times, we get that. Great. So now we're reusing the component to render the list of podcasts as they show up over here. Don't worry about populating the content yet. We'll do that in a few moments. But the next thing we want to do is set up the component for this track right here. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll call this one episode because each one of these represents a podcast episode. So let's go ahead and set that up. So inside of, let's see, we have our column 3 div. Right here. So right here is where the other column should be for rendering this list of podcast episodes. So if we go back to the home mustache, we have our column 3 here, and then the next one is column 9. So if we go back to the index, the entry point, I'll just call it the entry point from now on, we want to create a new div for column 9, like that. And again, don't forget this is class name. And then in here, we have a container div. So this one right here, from here to here, looks like the first track. Let's try and move this guy over. So we have, let's copy this and go back to the entry point, and then here. So we have a lot of adjustments to do here. So first things first, we got to take these class references and convert them into class name. So just do a Command Option F and do a find and replace. Let's see if we have any unclosed tags. So typically that would be image tag. We have a source tag here that's unclosed, so we want to close that. Okay, and then we also want to find any style attributes, because in JSX you can't have style like you would normally have here. Every style attribute has to be a JavaScript object. So you want to do it like that. And then the instead of the hyphenated text, you have to use a camel case like that. And this should be in its own string like that. So that's an important rule of JSX, is that the style attributes are not the same as you would see in regular HTML. They have to be inserted as JavaScript objects like you see here. So right here is another case where we have a style attribute. So that has to be like that. And then the 100% has to be like that. And these are just JavaScript objects. So we want to be mindful of any more style attributes. We can do a quick search for style, and we see 1 and then 2. And that's an important JSX rule that you need to be aware of when you're converting HTML content into React components. So it's very, very important. Make sure you pay attention to that. I'm going to fix these indents. Let's go ahead and save that, and let's see what we get. No errors on Webpack. And let's see what we get over here on the React side. And here we have a React component which shows an episode of a podcast. So let's create a dedicated component out of that. So if I head over to the components directory, and then we do a new component called episode. And then, whoops, I created a folder, my mistake. Let's try that again. Episode. So inside the components, we want to create an episode. Okay, and then let's import what we need. Let's create the component. Let's export it here. Head back to the entry point, and we essentially created the component over here. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this guy over into here. Okay. And this is going to be our episode component, and then let's go ahead and import that like so. So episode, and then let's render that in here. Okay, and let's see what we get, and everything looks the same. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy and paste a few more, and let's see how that looks over here, and we're good to go. So now we have this split up into components. We have our podcast search results, we have our episode, and we have our nav bar. So for now, we're going to go run with this. We'll finish out the components later. Most notably, the footer we'll deal with later. But these are the components that we'll need to actually interface with the project itself. Let's add one more right now that we're going to need to actually interface with the app, which is going to be the search bar. So this over here. So let's go ahead and find that in the home page. So it's back in column 3. And that's this guy right here, search podcasts. So that's going to be this block of HTML right there. So hopefully you can see that. And then we want to go back to the entry point. And that goes, where does that go? Let's see. That's right inside the column 3. Oh, nope, I grabbed too much. Let's try that again. So it's actually right here. That's all it is. It's only this these lines of HTML. So make sure you have that. And then let's head back to the entry point. And right inside the HTML, it's inside right above the UL and inside the featured user div. So we have our featured user div, and right above the unordered list, we want to just drop that off right there. Get the indents right. And then like I was saying about earlier about well, first of all, let's get the class names taken care of. So let's take care of that, and that. And then remember what I was saying earlier about the style attributes. So these have to be converted into JavaScript objects. So like that. And that has to be a string. Same thing here. And we can just leave that as a number because it automatically assumes the units are pixels, px. And then same thing here. And we can just put this whole thing in as a string like that. And that should be good to go. Let's make sure we didn't miss any style attributes. Okay, go ahead and save that. So make sure you save that. And then let's head back to our UI, our React UI. And now we have that. And we have that weird size for the button. Let's see what's going on there. $32px. Yeah, so that's what we wanted on the button. But for some reason, this isn't showing up. Maybe if we got rid of that and made it a number. Okay, there we go. So now we're in business. our UI is now parallel to the themes UI, except now we're using all React components, and this is what we're going for. So this is an important concept in React. You want to carve up the UI into a series of components that are then rendered. It's basically reusable parts is the main thing here. We want to make sure our UI consists of reusable parts. That way our UI is modular and can be extended and reused in different portions of the project. So hopefully you got all that working. Let's go ahead and run this as a production build and throw it up on the staging environment and make sure everything looks accurate over there as well. But before I do, the last thing I'm going to do is take the index.mustache, head over to the routes folder, the main.js, and instead of rendering the home, I'm going to render the index and get rid of this test route right here, because really we want the home page to be our React project. So we just swapped out one for another. So now if I go back to here, I can go to the home page and I will see the React UI instead of the theme, which is really what we're going for anyway. So this is a better organization. But again, this is all React. So let's go ahead and turn off the server and turn off the Webpack build script. Let's run the production build, so npm run build. So if you go to the package.json, you'll see a build script which gives us a production build, and then this is going to give us an optimized version which we can then throw onto the server and make sure it works over there as well. So here's our production build, which is done, and if I run this locally, just make sure everything still works, which it does. And now let's go ahead and turn off that server and let's throw it up onto the staging environment to make sure everything works on staging as well. So I'm going to pause this while the deployment is going up. Okay, the deployment is now up. Let's head over to staging and take a look. Okay, great. So here's what we have on staging, which is the same thing. Again, this is a live staging URL, and this is now rendering the React code that we wrote, the components as you can see here, and this is what we're going for. So in the next video, we're going to customize these components so it renders dynamic data, so it's not the same thing every single time. So hopefully you got all this working. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 3.